Everyone, and thank you for sharing your Saturday with us. My name is Gail Fast, and I'm a program analyst at the Office of Advisory Neighborhood Commissions. Joining me today, and they're going to wave while they're on the screen, are Kathy Williams, Special Assistant to the Executive Director, Dawn Dickerson, Program Manager, Leonard Barnum, Program Analyst, and Ronald Gaither, the OANC's very own IT Specialist. He's a behind the scenes kind of guy, so he's not shaking his hand. Interim Executive Director Shanette Grant is also listening in. Today's new commissioner orientation will be presented by our Executive Director, Kent Bass. We are so excited to have Kent on board and delivering this valuable training. We do have a large group today, so just be aware of that. And Kent has some housekeeping rules that will hopefully help move this process along. And due to redistricting, just as a sort of fun fact, we are now 346 strong, up from the 296 ANC commissioners we seated in the last term. So let's begin. Kent, you're up.
Thank you, Gail. That was very helpful. Good morning, everyone. I look forward to having this conversation. Also want to put out there up front that this will be not the only time we talk based on the way this office engages with ANCs and supports the work you do. We will likely have a continuing conversation throughout the year and your term. I will start by sharing my screen so that we have my PowerPoint presentation. And let's see. Present. And before I start, Gail, if you could confirm that the PowerPoint is in fact showing.
It is. And we can also see our ASL interpreter.
Fantastic. So I always try to do that, as anyone who's given a presentation may know. Sometimes technology is both a blessing and a challenge. And because me sharing a PowerPoint encompasses my entire screen, I can't see what you see. So again, Gail has welcomed you. I'm very excited to be spending this morning with you. Just for outline of what we're going to do today and some of our housekeeping. I'm going to try to stick to this schedule as closely as possible. I understand that more time may be needed in some sections other than others based on questions or need for clarification. We're going to go over the basics of ANCs in the morning from about 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. If we do not need the full time, then the break for lunch will be a little bit longer. I'm sure we won't hear any negative responses to that. Worst case scenario, we will break for lunch at 1 p.m. We will resume about 1:20, and we have a panel discussion scheduled for 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. It's a mix of some current commissioners and commissioners who may be current but are cycling off, so that you will have an opportunity to ask them questions and learn from their experience doing exactly the job you have signed up to do. As you've noticed, we also have ASL support today, and we are recording the session for future reference. Not listed in here is at the top of the hour or where it makes sense. We may have short breaks if people need to stretch their legs. I recognize that a 3-hour stint is quite a run, so we will try to be accommodating to that.
Kent, I just want to interrupt. There's a small little bar at the bottom. Can you hit the hide button?
I can.
Thank you.
Your wish is my command. Thank you for that.
No problem.
Okay. Gail has already introduced you to the OANC team. I would like to provide a little bit more background, just so that you know who these folks are and when you may engage with these members in our office. You've already been introduced to me. I, in many ways, will be perhaps the highest level point person that you talk to when you have questions on what does Robert's rules say? I have an issue that might be interpreted in multiple ways. Could you please give me some guidance? In support of that, Kathy Williams and Gail Fast, who has been moderating this program, will also be people that are most likely to pick up the phone when you call. They are also people that are likely to be the point people that respond to your emails in addition to myself. Dawn Dickerson, you are going to get to know very well. She will be working with you on your quarterly financial reports, or if you have questions regarding grants or any kind of treasurer duties. Leonard Barnum, you probably have already been introduced to. He has been reaching out to you for images for your badges. He's also very good with doing some of the logistics of issues you may have. So you have already been introduced to Leonard, and Ronald, who is the behind the scenes person making all this technology work for us, is also somebody you will get to know if you need to reset an ANC email password. So we all work in various different ways to support each other and to support you. I think it's helpful, while we're here today to talk about your role, it's helpful for you to know what our role is, since our mission is to support you. We do provide advice to commissions. As I've already indicated, we are your first line of defense when something comes up that seems unfamiliar. If you have questions related to parliamentary procedure, if you have questions about how to interpret district laws or statute as it guides ANC operations, or as new issues come up that haven't been anticipated. Like, we can work with other offices like the Attorney General if we need to dig into an issue. We also protest the oaths of office. This is very important. You will all be sworn in on January 2nd, or if you can't make that date, at a later date from your council member. And part of the oath of office is a form that needs to be signed by you and the oath giver. We collect those and make sure that they're signed and make sure that you're official and you can perform your duties. We also facilitate special elections. We will get a little bit more into this later, but if your commission has a vacancy, and if more than one people are determined to be eligible to run for that vacancy by the Board of Elections, we will be involved to make sure that the election happens and that you have someone who's able to fill your seat. Obviously, we don't do that for the biennial elections in November, but we do provide that support when vacancies occur for whatever reason throughout the term. We also facilitate training for commissioners, not just this orientation, but we have a string of orientations that will be coming up in this coming few months. You may have seen that we've already scheduled one for the Alcohol Beverage and Regulatory Agency, frequently referred to as ABRA. So if you don't know your acronyms, you probably will get to know them very quickly in the next few months. So anything that deals with liquor licenses, we've already got that orientation scheduled. We are also working with DDOT, with Department of Transportation, with zoning and planning. So expect to see opportunities to increase your knowledge in some areas that frequently come up before your commissions. We also provide financial support in various ways, not just helping you with your QFRs, but we do have a technical assistance fund if the ANC needs money that's not available so that you can pay your bills. And we do provide, related to that, if you need ASL support or language services, those are things that we take on as an expense. For instance, if you need ASL services at your meeting, there's a form to fill out. You don't have to worry about it coming out of your budget. It comes out of our budget. And as you can imagine, we provide technical and administrative support. So there are a lot of things that we can do on a regular basis that makes your lives easier. Also, be on the lookout for some resources you may use on a regular basis. For those who are participated in our Thursday call, we referenced the ANC playbook, which was set up for new commissions and developed with in partnership with the Actos Group, which is a group of volunteer commissioners who are have volunteered to work with us and identify areas of most usefulness. But also the ANC has a handbook that's very, very detailed and a liaison list. That the handbook is currently being updated and will be distributed at the beginning of your term. So you will not be without it. It will answer many of your questions. And the liaison list is your primary points of contact with the various agencies and offices throughout the district who are required by law to provide a point person for you. So we maintain that. The second two bullets are things that we are currently updating so that we can make sure that we give you current and accurate information at the beginning of your term. One thing that could be very helpful too is how do you contact us? There are three primary ways. The first two more common than the third. Our phone number is 727-9945. And a general email is oancs@dc.gov. Those two should be what you rely on most often. We do have a presence on Twitter. It's helpful to help so that we can monitor some of the things that are being discussed. But for really complicated questions, or matters of nuance, it's much more helpful for us to have a conversation or an email so that we fully understand what your concern or question is, and then we give you the right answer rather than an answer that does answer your question, but doesn't necessarily answer your issue because we weren't able to dig deeply to fully understand what the question was. So now, something I want to put out here at the front, I thought it would be helpful if we had maybe a case example of perhaps a project that I know is coming up in the neighborhood I live in. And I'd kind of like to talk through this so that you can kind of see the ins and outs of where an ANC may automatically have a seat at the table, where maybe it has great weight, where it doesn't, how zoning may play in. So I'm throwing this out here at the beginning so that you can kind of think about it. And then we will revisit this at the end of our time today, right before the panel. So something for you to think about. This is a scenario where the city has decided that they want to replace a 1980s recreation building that's on a relatively small playground. It's 1.5 acres. The budget in the capital budget is $12.3 million. That was set 4.5 years ago. The site is a historic site, but the building is not historic. So there's no issues with raising it. It is also zoned RF4, which means it's zoned for a row house zone. My question for you to think about is, what issues do you think you would encounter, and how would you work through them as you engaged in such an impactful change within your community? To set this up a little bit more, the top of the map on the right is north. So on the north and the east and the west are row houses, and on the south is an elementary school. So just stick that away. And as we talk through some of the duties of a commissioner and where commissions have great weight and with regards to public notice, just think about how would you approach this, and then we'll have a discussion about it as we get further. So the basics, your role as a commissioner. Another thought process is, what is your role as an advisory neighborhood commissioner? Do you think commissioners are more activists, where they organize protests and they perhaps gather people to come down to the council and demand changes. Do you think that they're more community advocates who go to the council and other meetings to testify before the council? And the answer is commissioners are elected officials who represent the opinions and views of the plus or minus 2,000 people they've been elected to serve. More often than not, you're going to be advocates. You will collaborate, you will facilitate meetings to get input, you will build and maintain relationships, you will have a physical presence in your community. But that doesn't mean that there aren't activists or what we consider to be traditional activist activities that don't get used from time to time. It may not be the primary hat you wear, but mobilization is something that ANC commissioners do from time to time. For instance, if there's an important issue in your neighborhood that perhaps deals with a large planned unit development, part of the job that you will have to work through is how do you inform the community and in some way mobilize them to get engaged so that they go to the public meetings that are designed for their input to make sure that all of the voices in your community are heard. I think it's important to point out that trying to build consensus is not easy. And while there are going to be times when the input and feedback you get from your community clearly tells you which direction you should go on an issue and how you should support it, there are also going to be times when the information that you have available to you that has been given to you from the agencies or a department indicates that maybe the best interest of the community is not what the community thinks that they want. And in those instances, part of your job is explaining to the community who have any questions or feel differently, why a different direction may be in their best interest. So now for nuts and bolts. Getting started at your first meeting. Some of the things you have to do at your first meeting is you do need to elect officers. It is required that the officers of each commission are elected in every January. You also need to join the ANC Security Fund, which is bonding for each commission. Should there become a money issue where you've done your job to the best of your interest, but money goes missing for whatever reason. And I know Dawn would be able to speak to this better when we get later into the presentation. But what it does is it provides a certain amount of support for the treasurer and the chair if there's an impropriety with the money that's not their fault. There's also a requirement that you include an open forum in the meeting agenda. And what that is a section of your agenda that you set aside for members of the community to share their concerns, share information. It may not be germane to any of the items that are on your agenda in the official business, but it may be something that is important for the community to know. So there is a requirement that a section of the meeting be set aside to hear what the community thinks is important for you. You also need to meet with the bank to update your signature cards. And this goes into your ability to write checks. In fact, the security fund is also part of your ability to write checks. When you elect new officers, the chair and the treasurer automatically are signers on your checks. You may also allow your vice chair or your secretary to have that courtesy. Once you've decided who you want of your officers to have signing authority, you do need to meet with the bank. You do need to go down there to update the signatures on your signature cards you will want to take your minutes from your January meeting, which shows that they have been elected to be those into those roles. And you will want to take your security fund paperwork, which we will provide to you. And once you get all of that accomplished, you will send the security fund paperwork to us and we will get it processed. And as soon as everything's approved, you will have the ability to sign checks for the year. Things you may want to do, but since you are new commissioners, not necessarily serving in new commissions, you may not need to do. But you may need to designate a chair pro tem to conduct the elections or to start the meeting. Because if you are on a commission where the current chair did not run for re-election, they will no longer be in that position to start the meeting. You can choose any one of the commissioners to act in that role. It is important to keep in mind, though, that once the elections are conducted, the newly elected officers take office immediately, and the newly elected chair would then start running the meeting from that point. You may need to set a meeting calendar. While the calendar is typically set, I would say in the new year, if you're starting midterm, I'll say I kind of look at the ANC year two ways. The fiscal year, of course, starts on October 1st, and there are things that need to be voted on and approved by October 1st that you will just be inheriting. And then there are things that you need to do in January, like the elections. So you may already have a calendar that's been adopted by the commission for you. But if you think that there's a need to change that calendar, you are certainly welcome to revisit that. And if you do that, please send us your meeting dates that have been newly selected so that we can make sure that when people call our office asking when your meeting is, we can give them correct information. As I indicated, for commissioners newly elected to existing commissions, you should already have a budget. The budget would have been adopted by October 1st. However, that does not mean that you can't change your budget. So if you review your budget in January and see where the money was put by the former commissioners and have any ideas that perhaps the balance isn't how your commission would like to allocate the funding, you can make changes. That's perfectly fine. Just make sure that you do it with a vote and that you share that budget with us. And I would say you also may want to consider setting a means for contacting constituents. There are 4 approved ways of connecting with constituents that will then lead to appropriately noticed meetings. The 4th one gives you a lot of leverage and leeway. It just says that you have the ability to tell us and tell your constituents how you intend to notice the meeting. So just to go over them, having it published on your website is a good practice. You can also put notice in a local newspaper or newsletter. Again, we recognize that many people don't do that. And that a lot of local newspapers have gone away. However, the requirement for a newspaper does not speak to format. So if there is something in your community that functions like a newspaper, portrays itself as a newspaper, but it's 100% digital, that would meet the newspaper requirement. You can notify through an email list. So if there's a listserv that many people are on, you're allowed to use that. You can also notice by posting flyers in 4 locations with every SMD. Now, we know that most ANCs don't do this. Some may need to do this during their first month just because they haven't met as a commission yet and they are in a brand new commission. But if you do choose that method, one thing I would also recommend is those flyers definitely have to be posted at least 7 days in advance in 4 places within each SMD. So if you do that, please take photographs of the postings so that should they be torn down, you can at least show that the commission did in good faith post those flyers. So let's talk a little bit about the election of officers and some of the roles. The chairperson primarily convenes the meeting, so they also chair the commission, and they have the ability to sign checks. They're one of the 2 officers that automatically sign checks. They do not, by default, represent the commission. They are an equal member of the commission who has the additional responsibility of running the meeting. They should not do, although doesn't necessarily mean they can't, but they should not do, to avoid conflicts, supervise commissioners or any staff members you have. They should not be the primary person setting the meeting agenda, and they should not be the sole representative to DC government. One thing that is often done when commissions are considering and approving resolutions and letters is they frequently indicate which commissioner will be representing the ANC on that issue. Sometimes it can be the chair, but sometimes it can be the single member district commissioner. Generally, the ANC puts forward a representative that is most knowledgeable about that issue and can best speak to it. So keep that in mind. The other officers, the vice chair generally carries out the functions of the chairperson in the chair's absence and performs other duties as specified by each commission's bylaws. I will also say a very helpful function of the vice chair is you can also consider the vice chair that if the chair during a meeting feels compelled that they need to step down from that meeting so that they can represent their single member district fully on a complicated matter, they can also choose to do so and have the vice chair chair that particular meeting. I'm happy to have that discussion with anyone in the coming year should that come up. The secretary is primarily responsible for the minutes, for creating the meeting notices and distributing those and making sure that they're out 7 days in advance, and organizing and maintaining the other documents. And as you would expect, the treasurer is the primary check signer, keeper of the checkbook, maintains the ANC's financial reports, and produces and submits quarterly reports. I will also say that there's nothing that says the treasurer has to do all of the accounting functions. Some commissions do have support staff that functions much as an accountant and helps keep the books, but the treasurer is responsible for making sure that they are done accurately and are current whenever somebody has a question about the finances of the commission. Now, I did want to touch somewhat on vacancies. As many of you may know, there are quite a number of vacancies that were identified following the November election. I know I have shared this out on Twitter and in other formats, but I thought it would be helpful for you all to go over this as well. So once a vacancy is declared, the Board of Elections starts the vacancy filling process by publishing it, the notice in the DC Register. Right now, I believe, if memory serves, that the Board of Elections, being aware of the vacancies that exist following the November elections, will be publishing notice in the DC Register in early January. When something is noticed in the DC Register by the Board of Elections, the following Monday, anyone interested in those vacancies will be able to pick up the paperwork and start the process. The affected Advisory Neighborhood Commission has 90 days to fill the vacancy and to completely end the process with an appointed commissioner. If no one steps up, the Board of Elections republishes the notice and it continues to get republished until that vacancy is filled. I will also say that other vacancies may come up during your term. Someone may need to resign if they move out of their single member district. Sometimes people, for various reasons, move to another city in the middle of a term. So this process will be used for all of those. When a vacancy occurs, for instance, should any of you today find that in 8 months' time that you need to step down, you do need to notify the Board of Elections in writing, and then also include the Office of ANCs, the council, and I believe there may be 1 or 2 other people to notify. So should you have any questions, please reach out to us and we will walk you through that process should that happen. Also, ANCs may have committees and task forces. They generally include commissioners, but they can also include residents. The committee chairperson is frequently appointed by the commission, but a committee chairperson does not always need to be a commissioner. So what I would do for each of you is, if you have committees, check your bylaws and see if there are standing committees in the bylaws. Those are committees that previous commissioners have determined must be committees, and you do need to work to get those functioning or have members in those committees. Oftentimes, some committees may exist in standard operating procedures or other operating documents of your commission. Those can be amended much more easily, but if you have a committee in your bylaws, either work to find people who are interested in filling that role, or if it's just not going to happen, you may want to consider amending your bylaws, and we can talk about that in a bit. Committees can be focused on transportation, grants and housing, parks, watershed, community outreach. Oftentimes, commissions will have standing committees that relate around zoning issues, which come up for your ANC frequently. They may be centered around alcohol licenses, which can come up frequently for some commissions. It's an opportunity for the ANC to give more time to the dialogue and provide more opportunity for community members to be engaged on issues that deeply impact the community, which in many ways can be more helpful to the full commission when it meets, so that the issues are better understood and the commissioners have a better idea of how they should use their judgment to weigh in on that issue. Task forces, on the other hand, are temporary. They deal with one issue and then go away, and are much easier to stand up. And I would say frequently, due to their nature, commissions should always have the opportunity to create an ad hoc committee to deeply dig into one issue and then cease to convene when the issue has been addressed. A good example was the comprehensive plan amendment. And while most people probably think the comprehensive plan is done and over, Office of Planning should be starting a new process in the next year or two, because this last cycle took so long to get through. I think before I get into the next section, Gail, do we have any questions in the chat that relate to anything we've covered that I can perhaps provide more background on now?
I asked Dawn to also unmute too. She's been helping me
Okay.
in the chat. Just one point of clarification, Kent, if one of the things that has come in the chat, if you can just speak a little bit louder, your voice tends to be going in and out. So sometimes it's a little hard for you to hear. So the audience has asked you to speak a little louder.
Okay, I will try. You know,
There you
I
go.
will say that part of it may be that I'm a little coffee deprived this morning, so I apologize for that. But yeah, I will try to speak up. So, and if I start to get quiet again, please nudge me.
No problem. So what we'll do, we do have 136 attendees, 128. However, do you want to take just a few questions
Yeah,
now
I think
from what we've covered?
I think focused on what we've covered thus far, if there are 2 or 3 questions that really need more explanation, I think it would make sense to do this now before we continue, with the understanding that when we're done with the slide deck, we will have a Q&A session for anything we haven't covered.
Okay, so let's do this. For the attendees, just the easiest way I think we'll do is we'll take a raise of hands. And if you do that, and the question should be for what we have covered so far. And so I see one question and there's other raise of hands, and I will unmute you to let you answer that. Well, actually I only see one hand.
Okay.
Got 2 hands, 3 hands, that's it. 4 hands. Stop. No more hands. You guys, this is the quickest. Here we go. All right. So, Commissioner-elect Sherman, I am going to unmute you and allow you to answer your question. Go ahead.
Morning, and I very much appreciate the session. It's incredibly helpful. My question concerns legal authorities that ANCs have, in particular, the authority to draft legally binding contracts.
Well, that may be something we need to go into a little bit later because I want to give that one some thought. Legally binding contracts, I will say, from my, and perhaps some of you may know this, others may not. I do have 12 years experience as a commissioner myself. I do not remember any legally binding contract outside of, you may perhaps have a contract for a staff member. In that context, you generally may sign on to things like community agreements from planned unit developments, which are supposed to be binding. The issue with that will tend to be who's the enforcement agency when the terms are not met. Those types of documents kind of go into the zoning record. So it's technically DCR. Well, I guess it was DCRA. Now it's the Department of Buildings would be the enforcement agency. So there's some work there. But if you have a type of contract that you're thinking of, that would be helpful because I know that I have not seen a lot of them.
Right. Well, I could give you an example if that would be helpful.
It would.
So on a construction project in our ANC that the commission has drafted a memorandum of understanding with the developer. And that memorandum of understanding encompasses a number of conditions that the developer is required by the MOU to meet. The question then becomes, in drafting that contract, is the ANC in the first instance exercising its statutory authority? Where does that authority come from? And then secondly, in terms of meeting those conditions, is the ANC then empowered to pursue legal remedies if need be to ensure the conditions are met?
In such a situation, an MOU is really considered more of a community agreement. It's very similar to a liquor license. Shall we say, I guess they used to call them voluntary agreements, and now they're called settlement agreements. They are supposed to be legally binding, but I believe that the Department of Buildings I think the Department of Buildings would be the enforcement agency. So there would have to be collaboration with them to see what they can bear. Beyond that, I would like to dig deeper into this and get you a better answer, because I have not seen an ANC necessarily retain counsel to enforce one of these. So I'd like to see if it's ever happened and what the outcome was. So if you could give me a little time to dig deeper into that, I would appreciate it.
No, thank you. I appreciate the answer.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Sherman. Folks, okay, we're going to move to the next question. That is Commissioner Hart, Chris Hart, unless there's another one. So hold on, I will unmute you. Commissioner Hart, you're up.
Thank you, and thanks so much for the presentation this morning. I just had a quick question, because it seems like there's lots of things that need to be done in preparation for the first meeting. So can a commissioner-elect who's a brand new commissioner, are there basic functions that we can perform prior to being sworn in, like developing an agenda and making sure the meeting is publicly noticed?
Sure. Well, again, interesting question. Are you officially? Yeah, actually, I say there are things that you can do. You once you are sworn in on January 2nd, you do need to set an agenda. So you are it's perfectly appropriate for you and the other commissioners to come together. You could maybe have a committee of the whole where you put the agenda together. The agenda does need to be noticed in the broadest sense to the community 7 days in advance, as well as the meeting. So you do need to provide the meeting notice before your meeting, which will happen before that meeting. When I say that the agenda needs to be distributed in its broadest sense, it can be a draft agenda and it may actually be skeletal, but as much as it's always helpful to share that out. And if you have a website, your agenda should be on the website, which all of that would definitely happen before your first meeting. So I would say just don't feel hamstrung. Like there are some things that the commission does need to do. It's not official action and nothing is official until you meet and vote on it, but there are things that you need to pull together. Sorry, Gail.
No. I was just making sure that you were talking about things that can be done before they are sworn in.
Oh, before swearing in. I thought this was before the first meeting.
No. So before, just to clarify, this is before being sworn in, when commissioner-elects can meet informally, however, cannot discuss anything that would be considered official business.
Correct.
So if you want to clarify on that, that would be great.
No, correct. There could be informal discussions. I'm sure they happen, but the commissioners-elect are not authorized to do anything in a capacity as a commissioner before they are sworn in on January 2nd. It might be helpful to have an idea of some of the issues that may need to be on the agenda. I would encourage commissioners-elect to maybe talk to the current commissioners to see if there's any issues that need to be carried over by the new commission, because the current commissioners certainly should be allowed to do that in their capacity. But January 2nd is your start date and a very important date for the commission to start functioning. If you are not able to get sworn in on the 2nd, also a good opportunity to emphasize that if you are not sworn in prior to the meeting, then you can attend the ANC meeting, but you cannot vote on official business until you have been duly sworn in. So keep that in mind too.
And sorry, just to add on to the question real quick, Ken. So I believe our meeting is scheduled for 7 days from the swearing in date. So can we prepare a public notice prior to the 2nd, but not distribute it in any official capacity? Or does that have to be done once we've been sworn in?
I would say technically it should be done once you're sworn in, but the commission that's outgoing, they still have authority until 2 p.m. on the 2nd. That commission could very well send your agenda out for you because they are still acting in their capacity as commissioners.
Okay, thank you.
So that's a long way of saying I would work with them to solve that 7 days after swearing in conundrum, but it is solvable.
Great, thank you.
Hi,
Okay.
Gail, this is Dawn. I'm
Yes.
sorry to break into the chat, but I'm into the conversation, but I did want to, there were 2 questions in the chat that I wanted to make sure got addressed. One was, could you please repeat the methods of communicating about a meeting, and then also restating what are the required number of the required methods.
So Ken, the question was about the methods for communication. And you mentioned that there are 4.
Yeah.
And the chat is, if you could just briefly reiterate what those 4 are in the statute.
Absolutely. And also, we will distribute those as well. They are on page 5 of the playbook, which we will distribute after this so that you can all see it in writing. The first is posting written notices in at least 4 conspicuous places in each SMD. The second is publication in a city or community newspaper. Again, doesn't speak to format. So if something does function in that manner, that would count. But do not confuse an online publication that's a public listserv as a newspaper. That's quite different because that would fall into number 3, which is transmitting or distributing notice to a list of residents or other stakeholders in the community. And then the last one is in any other manner approved by the ANC. So if there is an effective way to communicate that doesn't fall into the first 3, where your constituents know to look, you can certainly designate that as one of your 4 methods. For instance, you could designate that your ANC website, which you maintain and is current, is one of your 4 methods of communication.
And you need to just choose 2.
You only need to choose 2 to comply. You do not need to do all 4.
Great. Did that answer the question in the chat, Dawn? So we can go on to the next commissioner question, raised hand. All right. We then will move to Commissioner Rice. You are unmuted.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning. My question is about those of us who will not be sworn in on January 2nd. You mentioned some paperwork that needs to be signed by whomever is swearing us in and by us. Where do we pick that up?
We can give you the paperwork. We will have it at the swearing in on January 2nd, so no one needs to worry about that. For commissioners who are not there, we can supply it to you. You can sign it once you're sworn in. If you get it to us, we can get the council member that swore you in to sign it, or you can give it directly to the council member to sign. Whichever way works best for you, as long as we get a copy. And Dawn, is a digital copy adequate for us?
So I'm just going to jump in there.
Yeah,
I
please.
don't know if Kathy wants to also answer. Commissioner Rice, probably the best thing, and Kathy, please chime in, is for you just to contact our office and let us know who you plan to use to swear it to be sworn in by. You can use your own council member. You can use any council member on the council. You can use actually the chairman or even the mayor if you so choose to actually officiate your swearing in. But generally, if you do that, we can get the paperwork to them. And then you just tell us when the arranged time and all that is. But I'm going to defer to Kathy. She and I generally handle elections, but she's the expert.
Okay, thank you.
Basically,
Kathy,
Gail, hi, this is Kathy Williams. Good morning to everyone. Basically, Gail is correct. Usually after you contact the council member, their staff person will contact our office. We will make sure they will receive the oath of office for you. Sometimes council members or the mayor have their own oaths of office, and you, of course, you can put your imprint on it at the same time. So that would be between you and the person who's swearing you in. While I am on the mic, I want to also mention, and I'm not sure, I just asked my colleagues, a commissioner mentioned the Federal Register in the chat. I want to make sure everyone understands any notices regarding advisory neighborhood commissioners are in the DC Register, not the Federal Register, which is part and parcel of the federal government. But the DC Register is a register of the District of Columbia. It comes out on Fridays. That will also be one of your notebooks on Friday to see whether or not commission vacancies are posted. I believe that someone also mentioned the first couple of months, the Board of Election will be posting the vacancies. After the Board of Elections has posted the vacancies for the persons who have to fill those vacancies from the election, then that task will fall upon advisory neighborhood commissioners within the 90-day period to declare a vacancy and let the board know. That's later on in the year. But just to make some clarification for you, by statute, the board is allowed now to place those vacancies in the DC Register to make sure you have a full house so that you can start out with a very clean slate and with a full group of folk to deal with the matters in your community. After that, then that task will fall to you. Gail, Leonard, I, and hopefully the director will be all part of that. So you'll be seeing us at these meetings. So I just wanted to make sure and cut that.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Gail.
No problem. Okay, we're going to take the last question, and that is from Commissioner Galvin. I'm going to unmute you. You are up. Commissioner Galvin, you're unmuted. Says you're here. Okay, well, that's it, Ken. We're ready to move on to the next.
Okay, we will move forward then. Going into bylaws, I mentioned bylaws earlier. They go beyond discussion of the conduct of meetings alone. The purpose is to govern the ANC's operations and internal structure. Bylaws are required for each ANC to have. I would like to note that ANCs are allowed to spend the money that is part of their budget to purchase Robert's Rules of Order or to even hire a parliamentarian if it would be beneficial to your commission. Bylaws are binding. Bylaws, in my opinion, I think of Mies van der Rohe, less is more. Since bylaws are binding and they are a bit onerous to change, keeping them to the requirements allows you to then expand some of your operations into as perhaps standard operating procedures document. But if you do have such documents, the bylaws should refer to them for further guidance. To give you an idea, if you have bylaws, you should also post them on your website if you have one. Some basic things that are required by statute is the geographic boundary of your commission area. I suspect for most people on this call, if not all, redistricting has changed the boundaries of the commissions significantly in some areas. That may need to be updated. It needs to include a statement of the commission responsibilities, your voting procedures, establishment of standing and special committees, the manner of selecting the chairpersons and officers, who the presiding officers are, procedures for review and action of committee recommendations, the use of your commission office and supplies, should you have an office, procedures for receipt of and action upon constituent recommendations, and your procedures for filling the vacancy of the office of treasurer. That last one, I would say, is extremely important. If your ANC does not have a treasurer, it's pretty much stuck. The other office holders can be vacant and the ANC can function, but not without a treasurer. So that's the one piece you must have. So since the geographic piece itself is probably going to be something that needs to be updated, even if everything else in existing bylaws is fine, it does require advance notice. Typically, when a commission wants to change its bylaws, it notices the community. Say, if you want to change them in February, you would need to provide notice to the community at your January meeting that you are going to be updating your bylaws. It does require a supermajority, which is a 2/3, whereas just about everything else the ANC considers is a simple majority. They do not need to be readopted every 2 years. We have received questions that, for instance, I believe ANC 2F has 100% turnover of commissioners. Not that we received this question from them, but in such a scenario, we've received questions as to, well, since none of the commissioners are returning, do we need to reapprove our bylaws? And the answer is no. The bylaws attach to the commission, and the commission is a continuing body. So anything the commission has taken a position on continues, regardless of who's in the seats. Who needs to know when the bylaws are changed? You need to send a copy to the council and to our office. And how soon? Within 30 days. If you have any questions on those, you can please let us know. So getting into meetings and written notices, how often must your commission meet? While many commissions meet 12 months out of the year, you are only required to meet 9 times a calendar year. Some commissions only meet 10 times a year, simply because they have trouble getting quorum in December if their regular meeting date tends to fall within the holidays. Or some commissions don't meet in August because a lot of work doesn't come through their commission in August, though it very well may in others. There's no requirement for the day of the week that your commission is on or the week of the month. It's helpful. I mean, it makes sense that you have a regular calendar, that you meet on the 2nd Thursday or the 4th Wednesday of every month, but there's no requirement for what day that must fall on. I say this because if your commission has traditionally met, let's say on the 2nd Tuesday, and you find that that day is a hardship or difficult for many of the new commissioners that are coming in, you certainly can change that day to another day of the week and another week of the month, and some commissions have done that. Holidays. What I would say on holidays is there's nothing that would automatically prevent your commission from meeting on a holiday, but depending upon your constituency, it is very helpful when you're setting your calendar to pay. I'm sorry. I was going to say, it's very helpful when your commission is setting your calendar to make sure that you take into account holidays, and keep in mind all holidays. You know, some holidays like Yom Kippur will move around, and you may want to look at that to make sure when it's falling so that you are not scheduling a meeting during a holiday. Government closures are also something that's frequently absent in many operating documents, but I would encourage you to look at your operating documents. It's very helpful to have a policy in place that for instance, should the DC government close down due to snow, is that a day that you will automatically cancel a meeting or not? There's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that the commission itself would not meet. So you need to take those things into consideration, as in if the schools are closed and there's something else that's going to take the attention or need the attention of some of your commissioners, perhaps it would be wise to have a policy on what the commission does when the government closes, whether it be due to bad weather. And if you could put that out and you have that policy, you can clearly put it on the agenda as a statement when you're sending it out for your notice. And that way constituents aren't confused when they get a notice that perhaps government has shut down. And the community, as we've already covered, should be noticed a minimum of 7 days in advance. Now, a couple of things I did want to go over based on comments and follow-up that we received from our earlier meeting. As you may be aware, many commissions have been meeting virtually for the last couple of years due to the pandemic. That authorization has been extended a couple of times, and most recently it has been extended for another 225 days. So things I would like you to consider when you're engaging in a virtual environment is think about, is your meeting secure? Do you have the settings set appropriately to prevent like the Zoom bombing that's been experienced? Are you going to be recording your meeting, which would then meet the requirements of transcriptions? Any meeting, whether it's the monthly meeting or a committee meeting, which has a quorum of commissioners and where you can reasonably expect that you're going to vote on official action, must have a transcript. A recording of a virtual meeting meets that requirement. Can your constituents engage? Think about how it's set up. Are constituents able to raise their hands to be recognized? Are they able to ask questions in a direct feature? How are you setting that up? Most importantly, if constituents have questions in the area that has to be set aside for community comments, they have to be allowed to participate. So does your meeting allow that? And have you set up the virtual meeting in a way where that can be accomplished? One issue that has come up frequently is chat or no chat. There is no requirement for the commission to have chat enabled. I think in most instances, it's probably helpful to have it disabled as long as anyone in the community is able to be recognized, be elevated even to a panelist so that they can ask their question and have that dialogue, and then demoted or shall we say returned back to the attendee list. So that's something to consider. And the reason why I wanted to bring it up is if the chat is not possible to be moderated, sometimes it leads to distracting behavior or becomes akin to someone standing in the back of the room and disrupting a meeting by saying whatever they want to say, even though they haven't been recognized. So just something for you to think about. And if you have any questions on that, I'm happy to discuss that either at the end of this presentation or as your commissions get up and running. The other thing I think is important for people to keep in mind is communicating with your constituents. We've mentioned that in addition to the required 7-day notification and the 4 methods that are in the code or in the statute for how you can communicate with your constituents to provide that notice, you may also want to think about effective communication. Checking the boxes to meet the legal requirement doesn't necessarily mean that your community knows what you're considering or what's before you. It's very helpful to try to think through, how am I going to let my constituents know and my neighbors know what we're considering in enough time that if there are any difficult issues that need to be addressed, it gives you enough time to have a special meeting or a community meeting and work through those issues before they come to the full commission in perhaps a very impactful way that is difficult to provide answers because you didn't know the questions in advance. So try to think forward, especially with something that's controversial or could be controversial, like a big development or a liquor license. In those instances, it may make a lot of sense for you to have a special meeting or a single member district meeting to work those issues through with your community. I would also say it's generally a good policy to keep the communications professional and informative and refrain from personalizing them as much as possible. One thing I do want to share in this is consider Twitter as you think forward, whether it's an email or a tweet. Good policy is never put something out that you may regret in the future or have to retract. Just be thoughtful about, am I communicating in a way that's sticking to facts, letting people know, and trying to inform them of what we need to discuss rather than getting into a back and forth. Also, not all emails that you receive need to be responded to in the 5 minutes that it's taken you to read it. It's always helpful to think about what's possibly behind the question, give it some thought, perhaps consult with your ANC colleagues to see if they have dealt with similar issues, and then effectively respond back with as much detail as you can and as politely as you can to make sure that you're addressing the issue. One question I received recently was, can you block people on Twitter? And while I don't think that there's anything that would prevent anyone from doing that, I think as a matter of policy or just community engagement, there are a couple things to keep in mind. If it's an ANC account that represents the commission as a whole, it's not a good idea to block anybody because then you're starting to select who in the community has access to the commission and who doesn't. I also think that if there's an abusive individual and it's very abusive, there are Twitter policies where individuals can be reported to see if they've breached their policy, or perhaps as a better option, there's nothing that would prevent you from muting that person, where they can still engage as much as possible, but perhaps it doesn't get to the top of your queue if it's not something that really can be addressed. I would think a similar scenario may be adopted if you are an individual that is representing themselves as a commissioner in their Twitter account. If you are on Twitter as a private person and it's not representing the ANC in any way, shape, or form, you are perfectly within your rights to block whom you want, mute whom you want. That's your personal account. And before we go into notice and open meetings, because we've been here for about an hour and 5 minutes, hour and 10 minutes, I think this would be a good opportunity for a 5-minute break in case anyone needs to stretch their legs. So let's do that and reconvene at 11:20, if that's okay. I didn't hear anything from you, Gail. I'm presuming that's okay. Yeah, and we will pick up the meeting where we were with noticed and open meetings. So, ins and outs of meetings. We've touched on some of these before, but it really can't emphasize this enough. Official meetings must be open. That is your monthly meeting. That is any committee meeting that is not for personnel issues, or I believe there's another thing. Sorry. This was something that we were discussing yesterday, and you'd think it'd be at the top of my head, but there's only two small areas where you cannot have a closed meeting. One is personnel issues, but or if you're talking about legal issues, we're getting back to the contract issue. But other than that, meetings are required to be open should anyone want to be a part of that. But you're also required to have a transcript anytime that the meeting has a quorum of commissioners where it's reasonably expected that somebody's going to vote on official action. So that's typically for most commissions only going to be your monthly meeting. But In some rare instances, it could be a committee meeting. For instance, if you have a transportation committee and the majority of the people making up that committee are commissioners, and you actually have a quorum of commissioners at that committee meeting, and you decide to vote on something, then you're going to have a transcript. As mentioned earlier, the draft agenda should be distributed 7 days prior to the meeting, as well as a public notice. Commissioners can meet privately for, can meet privately for internal ANC, legal, or personnel matters. And always defer to Robert's Rules of Order to conduct meetings where not otherwise provided in statute or in your bylaws. So what authority do you have as a commissioner? Well, commissioners monitor neighborhood complaints, concerns. They initiate proposals for government action. They can provide grants or operate programs. They can make recommendations on housing, parks, land use. We've talked about alcohol, public safety, transportation. But ANC's bylaw must be extended great weight, which is a term that is both meaningful and confusing. So great weight is actually guaranteed meaningful consideration, meaning that some agencies, not all, are required to give 30 days notice and great weight to commissions. The commissions that, or the agencies that are likely going to do this are alcohol beverage licenses, building permits and public space permits, zoning matters. ANCs are usually, but not always, entitled to great weight anytime an agency must give public notice of action. I've put up that during the COVID-19 emergency, the periods for notification were extended from 30 to 51 days and 45 days to 66 days. Those extensions are no longer applicable, but I mentioned them here in case someone on your commission in the future remembers those and says, well, I thought we had more time. I will say, with regards to zoning matters and the BZA, while the notice requirement does not change, if a BZA case or a zoning case is given to the ANC and you do not feel that your commission has enough time to work with the community to come up with consensus or position, you are always welcome to request that that hearing for the case be rescheduled to a later date on the calendar. It's not guaranteed that the BZA will do that, but they frequently do. So that's one of those instances where it never hurts to ask. Worst case scenario, you're right where you started, but frequently zoning in particular will be as accommodating as possible. So what exactly is great weight? As mentioned, it requires some agencies to consult with ANCs about matters in your neighborhood and to allow you the time you need to respond. Commissions must respond to matters either through a resolution or a letter. The format is not dictated. Great weight is extended to the commission. It is not considered for an individual SMD. So this gets back to the only authority that ANCs have is the commission when the commission meets and the commission's opinion. Single member district commission, well, individual commissioners do not have any authority outside of being a part of the commission. So that's something that's important. That said, there are going to be times when you as an individual commissioner may be asked your opinion. For instance, if DDOT is curious about where to put a bike share station, they may ask your opinion. It's not a formal request. It's not an action that the commission needs to take. It's just a conversation. So in those ways, you don't have great weight, but your opinion has been requested. An important takeaway: great weight does not mean that the district agency must accept what the ANC proposes. It simply means that the ANC's opinion was considered in the decision and that the agency must respond to you in writing why they did not accept your recommendation. So based on where ANCs have great weight and the types of notices that you frequently will receive, please prioritize the ones from the Alcohol Beverage Regulation Administration. Those are going to be your renewal of liquor licenses or notices of new liquor licenses. Most ABRA liquor licenses are on a 3-year renewal, those staggered. Not all taverns renew at the same time as liquor stores, so at least they're not all at once, but it is every 3 years. You will get bi-weekly notices from the Department of Buildings of building permits. Please pay attention to those. It can be a great way to get an idea of future development before any other type of notice comes your way, should they be seeking a variance. Department of Transportation, you will get notices from them, and you will get notices from the Office of Zoning whenever there's a zoning adjustment case like a variance, special exception, or even larger cases that are from the Zoning Commission. I will say that with the Office of Zoning, they are very detailed in what they expect from the commission to adhere to the great weight requirement. My recommendation is to always use the Form 129 or the Form 130, both of which are hyperlinked from this slide deck that we will share out. It's best to fill out those forms because they ask each and every question that they need from you to extend you great weight and allow you to append documents to that form if you need to go into details. So using their form is a wonderful way to make sure that your opinion from the community and that the ANC's decision is considered. As we mentioned, how to respond. Many commissions will use resolutions as the format to take official action by the body. You will notice in the example, a resolution typically has whereas clauses and ends in a therefore be it resolved. It is a very formal type of position. Resolutions, when you consider them, should be drafted and distributed among your commissioners so that they know exactly what they're voting on. It is not the type of format that you are going to use by saying, I would like to move to introduce a resolution for the commission to take a position, and then have your fellow commissioners say, well, I don't have a copy of it. There should be a copy in front of each commissioner if you're going to choose this format. On the alternative, the commission can also use a letter as its official response. A letter can be drafted after action is taken, provided that it accurately describes. But letters are a little bit more flexible as language. If you need to do a letter, I would make sure that if you need to do a letter that you're drafting following the meeting, make sure that you pass it through the rest of the commission to make sure that it accurately conveys the position taken. But regardless of how an ANC responds, every response must contain the date of the public meeting. You must state that a quorum was present, and it's helpful if you can give the number, say, five commissioners present, 0 absences, 0. I just say 5 present, 0 absent, and then you can give the vote as 5-0-0, and then you need to include the ANC's decision with the vote count, as I just indicated. So that's all very important. If those 3 pieces are absent, then it will not be considered for great weight. And keep in mind that a quorum is more than half of the commissioners that are present to vote. So to have a quorum, let's say you have a commission that's 11 people you need 6 commissioners at the meeting for a quorum, because that's one more than 50%. However, if you had a commission of 12, 6 would be exactly 50%, which is not a majority. So therefore, you do not have a quorum. In that scenario, you would need 7. So you do need to have a quorum present to take official action. And should someone leave a meeting and break quorum, then you are no longer able to take official action. So keep that in mind. So how do you contact a district agency? A lot of it's going to depend on how the agencies themselves like to be communicated with. As mentioned earlier, our office maintains a list that we call the liaison list. We're currently updating that. We will send that out by the end of the month, or definitely before you are sworn in. You can, depending upon the conversation that needs to be had, you can communicate by telephone, email, or in person. When you communicate, make sure that you're clear, that you're concise, that they understand the request or the action, and what to do if the agency is unresponsive to your requests. I think there are 2 great resources. You can always contact your council office. Many council members, and in fact, if not all of them, have constituent services staff that try to assist whenever the commissioners are not getting the responses that they deserve. Or the Mayor's Office of Community Relations also has an office that is citywide. Every ward has at least 2 dedicated staff members to work on your behalf. And typically they are also very specific to which ANCs that they're assigned to. So you do have a host of people that are on your side that can help you work through or navigate some of these issues with agencies, if in fact you have questions about how to communicate with them, or if you have communicated with them if there's no follow-up. All right. So now we are getting into some of the ethics issues. What to consider, what's right, what's wrong. Oftentimes there's nuances. So let's get into conflicts of interest and ethics law. In 2011, the council passed the revised Ethics Act and created a new agency called BEGA, the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability, and it does include a code of conduct which has specific prohibitions on conflicts of interests. The purpose of the conflict of interest provision is to ensure that public officials, including ANCs, do not use their official position to obtain financial gain for themselves or those closely affiliated with them, and to maintain public confidence in the ANC's decision. Notice that money or a thing of value is involved in the items in the list of prohibited actions. If a situation does not involve financial gain, it generally will not fall under the district's conflict of interest laws. Also want to give you a heads up that a filing of a financial disclosure form regarding the prohibitions is required by May 15th of each year of the previous year's activities. So since you are all newly elected, you will likely not need to file, and Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe you will need to file the financial disclosure form till next year because you are not in office yet.
That is correct, Kent.
Okay.
The financial disclosure form is filed for your previous year's activities. For those commissioners who are online now, who were commissioners last year, they would have to file, but not for our newly elected ones.
Okay, that is correct. Great, thanks. It is not a difficult form, and honestly, it is very bare bones with regards to ANCs, but it is still a required form, and failure to file the form can cause I'll say it's a colloquial word, but I want to say it can cause a little bit of a kerfuffle, but we can help you on that. There's it's not a difficult form to fill out. So if you are uncertain if you or another commissioner may have a conflict of interest, always ask for advice. You can contact our office, or you can contact the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability for assistance. Remember, full disclosure is always the best policy. As we were talking about at the other meeting on Thursday, one thing to keep in mind, especially with ethics, is if you are being offered a gift. For instance, someone asked if a local business was interested in providing food at the ANC meeting. Would that be a conflict of interest, or would it be allowed? Some of the things that we stated as things to be cautious of is that offer for the commissioners only, or is it for the entire community that's at the meeting? Is it a business that perhaps has pending business before the ANC, whether it's a liquor license renewal, or perhaps they own their building and they're going to be seeking zoning relief to do an expansion, or perhaps they have a pending public space permit for an outdoor cafe. Things like that should be, you should be mindful that those could be offers seeking special favors or special consideration. And in those cases, you should definitely avoid the offer and just kindly thank them for their generosity, but turn it down. I will also say that while ethics and government accountability are there's a lot of details when it comes to BEGA, but this is not going to be the only time we touch upon the subject. We are working with BEGA to have an orientation for you all, I think in early February, if not before, because we know that many of you are going to have questions when it comes to perhaps commissioner conduct, or was there a violation of was there a presumption, like what did someone accuse the ANC of perhaps using their Twitter account inappropriately, or did you receive a FOIA request, which of course we would help on that. And I think perhaps Kathy, you as our FOIA liaison might want to go into a little bit more detail about that and accountability before we move on.
Well, in terms of the Freedom of Information Act, we have what's called a FOIA, what to do in the event that you receive a FOIA request, and you will receive that. Basically, we ask that you comply, and that does not mean that you have to create any sort of files or any sort of lists. Just basically look at your telephone, look at the materials that will be on your ANC website, and determine whether or not you can respond to the FOIA. It's just a matter of saying yay or nay, and not to try to guess what the individual needs the information for, but just to make sure that you have it or don't have it. If you do have it, to give it to them. I always point out too that if you are transparent, and in fact with an individual who requests certain information at your ANC meetings, don't ignore them. Respond to them. Say whether or not you have it, or and if you do have it, to give it to them. All of the records of an ANC, except those records pertaining to legal matters and to the hiring of personnel, each and every one of your records are public, including the invoice that you just used to collect the 2023 calendar that you purchased for next year. A member of the public has a right to see that invoice. They have a right to see the materials that you portray in your QFR reports. So there is no need for protracted FOIA investigations, which this office has had and which we have to report on every year. So keep that in mind. And sometimes it can be annoying. Most of the time you get to know the same people. The same people are asking for FOIA. If you have it, tell them you do. If you don't, just say that you don't. The most important thing for FOIA, and I want to go back to campaign finance and also to BEGA, make sure that you adhere to the deadlines. If you can't make a deadline, say so. Don't just let the deadline pass, because when you have deadlines and you pass those deadlines, that's when you have fines. And for some of us who know DMV, the fines can be higher than it would actually, just in terms of just doing the work. And you might as well should have done that. Feel free to call me
And-
anytime. I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh, no, Kathy, I'm sorry. I thought you were finished.
And I was just going to say,
Okay.
feel free to call me anytime on 202-727-9945.
9945.
It's Saturday.
Kent, Kent, while we have Kathy on, there is a lot of questions in the chat and that maybe we can cover right now. Kathy, can you talk to the audience a little bit on, conflict of interest, but when it is appropriate to recuse yourself, and provide some guidelines? There's been a lot of conversation in the chat that you probably
And
can
wait a minute, Kathy,
answer
before you
quickly.
start, if you could specifically speak to this question of if a commissioner objects to a development or a housing project that abuts their boundary, would that be considered a conflict of interest?
Okay. Okay. Like Ken said earlier, for a lot of your questions, the Office of the Attorney General has responded to them. Bega has responded to them. I will say generally, a conflict of interest only matters if there's going to be money accruing to you. If the Advisory Neighborhood Commission is considering a matter, unless the money that may result from that matter will accrue to dollars in their pockets, it is not a conflict of interest. You, as a member of a commission, have a right. You have a right to make determinations on matters that may appear to be a financial gain to you or appear to be a conflict of interest. And most of the time, people start to look at interest, like maybe your brother's second cousin will be inheriting the amount of money that you may agree to a certain property. And that's what members of the public see. But the District of Columbia government can only basically justify an investigation or justify any sort of a matter of asking you to pay a fine if they have seen money pass hands. With regard to the specific issues that you were talking about, especially in the chat, I'll be glad to answer them next week. But I want to just make sure you understand that generally, Bega, the Office of Campaign Finance, it's about cash. And it's about how you use your office to get that cash. For example, if there's a person running for office and they want you to stand at the front and say, come and see Joe, he's going to be running for office. The only reason Joe wants you there is because you are an elected official. Unless you can point out to Joe says you're not, I don't want you here as my commissioner. But the point is, that is what you have to look to. You have to look to your office now, your elected office holders. And when people come to you and ask you to do certain things, I think Kent mentioned it earlier, be mindful of what they're asking. And also for yourself, think, I know you're my sister and I shouldn't do it, but why are we going to just ask for trouble? Can't you ask somebody else to do it? And in your private capacity, you can make any contribution that you want. But be very, very cognizant that the Office of Advisory Neighborhood Commissioner is an elected office. No, you're not getting paid. And yes, you're doing a whole lot of work. But the point is, there are people out there watching you. The number one person, for those of you who had opponents, is your opponent. But for the specific matter that you asked about, Gail and Dawn, I do believe that the OAG has written on it, and I believe that Bega has written an opinion on it. Please feel free to call me. I'm in the office. I'm always available if I'm not in the office. The telephone number I gave you, 202-727-9945. And we can talk about that later. For now, let's not, and also when you go to the Bega website has a lot of, FAQ, and that answers a lot of your questions.
Yes, and just to let folks know, we do take the chat afterwards. We have a copy of
Yes.
the chat, and
Yes.
we do supply it to the through our office to answer any questions that may not have been answered during this. There's a lot of stuff going on. So anyway, thanks, Kathy. Thanks,
Okay,
Ken.
no
We're-
problem.
We're good to go.
Okay.
Well, I will, if I might add a little bit to the BZA
Please.
question, whether Kathy wants me to or not. No, it'd be fine. So oftentimes with BZA cases or zoning cases, you can be an abutting neighbor. It's generally not considered a conflict of interest because unless there's some way to prove that you are financially gaining from whatever activity is, whether you support it or you oppose it. One could argue that there are a lot of complicated factors that go into property values. Not development alone is one factor, but not the only factor. The whole city's becoming more expensive, as we all know. So you're allowed to take a position. Now, as an abutting neighbor, if you are generally a budding neighbor, you could be you could request party status as an abutting neighbor, but that would not be as a single member district commissioner. That's a completely separate thing. And only the commission can speak to its position on the BZA case. So if you're an abutting commissioner who, whether you support it or oppose it, you are able to vote how you see fit. But if the commission as a whole takes a separate position, only the commission can represent that point of view. You, as a single member district commissioner, would not have party status in any way, shape, or form from the commission. And you could go to the hearing and speak as an individual, but you cannot go and speak on behalf of the commission because it's not the position of the commission. I would say in my years of service, I only saw one instance where a commissioner recused themselves from a development issue. It was appropriate and it was necessary because the issue before the commission was for a large development project from a development team of which that commissioner was an employee. So one could argue that they were definitely going to benefit from the large development because they were compensated for their work on that project. So, and I'm sure that Bega would have a lot more background on that, but hopefully that's helpful. And I also hope that provides some indication of the separation of a commission's position versus an individual's. And crickets. Okay. Moving on, I think we're moving into fiscal responsibility. Dawn, would you feel comfortable taking it from here since this is your side of the house?
I sure will.
Do you want me to just to forward the slides as we get there, or are you able? I don't know if you're able to manage them yourself.
Well, I'm not a host. I think you have to make me a host.